Welcome to the MS4 Modeling Environment graphing example. In this example, we will show you how to create a model that graphs a state value. In our workspace, we have one project called Graphing Example that contains one model called Grapher. We can open the text of this model to see how it works. The model functions by starting in the state graph value, and each time step it goes from graph value back to that original state. It accepts input on the ports double and add 1, and we've given it one state variable called value that is a double that starts at 0. Here we've defined two external events and attached them to the add 1 port and to the double port. When we receive input on the add 1 port, we execute value plus plus, which adds 1 to the state value. Similarly, when we receive input on the double port, we have value equals value times 2. To actually trigger the graphing of this state variable, we say graph value with label value. We can view this in SimViewer to see how it works. When the simulation starts, our graph will actually open on the right-hand side of the screen. And as we step through this simulation by clicking the step button, we can see that it graphs the value of our state variable versus the simulation time. We can right-click on the grapher model and inject input into the add 1 port. When we do that, we see on the right-hand side that our value is now 1. And by hovering over the model, we can also see the numeric value here in the summary. I can inject input into add 1 again and see it go up to 2 and then to 3. If we inject input into the double port, we will see that it indeed doubles and the value is now 6. So let's add a little bit to this model. Say we want to add a counter to keep track of how many commands the model has received. To do that, we can say use message count with type int and default 0. We also can add some to our external events. So now for this add 1 event, I want to add 1 to value and also add 1 to message count. And I want to do the same thing in my double event. So whenever we receive a add 1 or double command, message count will increase by 1. To trigger the graphing of message count, I can say graph message count with label. And let's say I want to graph this on a separate graph. I can say graph this on graph count. And just for a reference, let's say I also want to graph our value on the same graph. So now I have two graphs defined. I have the first graph, which will just graph value with the label value, and then I have the count graph, which will graph both message count and value. So now when I open up our SimViewer, our graph again pops up, and we can see this time it has two different plots. The top plot has just value, and the bottom plot has both message count and value. So as before, I can step through and inject a couple additions, and we can see the value changing appropriately. And now when I double this, I can see the difference on the lower plot between the number of messages received and the state value. So the blue line is the value, which is now up at 16. And the red line is the count of messages, which is up to 5. So this allows us to graph an arbitrary number of state variables onto as many graphs as we please and assign them labels if we like. Also note, by right-clicking in the graph window, we can print this graph, zoom in and out, or set the auto range to get all of our graph values in scope. Hopefully, this will give you a good guide on how to graph your state variables in your models. Thank you.